Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all these people who have come. It's an amazing thing to be doing on what is here a very sunny afternoon by the seaside in West Wales. I'm so excited to think about all of the collections that all of you must represent. But welcome. We have an hour and a quarter today to become familiar with fields we regularly use in cataloguing and the sorts of data that we record. So we've selected an item with some features that demonstrate key cataloguing principles, but it is entirely possible to spend an awful lot of time on specifics. So we aim at the end of today's session to have a complete bibliographic record. So we're encouraging questions throughout, so do put those in chat. And we'll try and deal with them. If there are some that Simon, he's going to keep an eye out. If he thinks it's worth interrupting for, then we'll do that. But otherwise, we can deal with them at the end. And any we don't get to, we can try and follow up in the next few weeks. We're not going to be looking at a holding and item record, and that you would need those to be able to see a resource in your catalogue or your discovery service. We're not going to look at them in part because they really vary from institution to institution, and in part just because we're going to focus on that bib data today. But if you do have questions about either of those, that holding record or the item record, then do ask. And I know you shouldn't start a session with a disclaimer, but I am. Be warned, this will be anything but perfect cataloguing. We have standards to follow, but what makes cataloguing so complicated and fascinating is how much decision making you have to engage in. And we are definitely not experts in cataloguing or in art. I just really like talking about and advocating for cataloguing, and I've roped in some of my colleagues. But if we can convince you that getting involved and seeing metadata as live information that can be thought about and shared and improved upon continuously, then we'll have done a good job. Another disclaimer, we're not going to talk explicitly today about RDA, resource description and access. So if someone was driving, well, someone who's new to driving, you don't tell them how things were before seatbelts were a legal requirement. You just wear it. So our policy for the purpose of today's session is just to meet a basic RDA standard. We're hoping we're going to do that anyway. But if it's helpful to talk about what you might need to spot in a non-RDA record, because we do all have those in our systems and we're still coming across them, then we're quite happy to talk about that afterwards. Finally, we've tried to keep today as simple as possible. So we have cut out lots of the usual processes involved in copy cataloguing, which is most of what we do in Aberystwyth. There's a lot of jumping from system to system, which really doesn't look nice on screen. But for us, I just wanted to say that our first port of call is always to go to somewhere like WorldCat or the JISC Library Hub to have a look at how colleagues throughout the ages and across the world have gone about starting the work for us. So I'm going to hand over briefly to Lloyd.
Hello everyone, I'm Lloyd and I'm a subject librarian at Aberystwyth University. That is to say, I'm not a cataloguer, but in the last year I've dabbled in cataloguing. And I suppose the idea of dabbling in cataloguing might be anathema or a bit frightening to the full-time cataloguers joining us today. But I wanted to share some of my experience of how undertaking some cataloguing activities, joining a short project or a training session like this one, can be helpful for the non-cataloguers among us. My usual work is obviously quite end-user focused, providing information literacy training or assisting library users to use our catalogue and get the most out of the collections. But in the last year, Simon and I did some work on a project to help catalogue a large collection of primarily photography books, which came as a donation to our library. As a subject librarian, I found this brief stint as a cataloguer most valuable, not just to dust off some old skills for their own sake. I had done some cataloguing and worked with metadata in previous jobs, but also to think about its relevance to my current role. I think at times we could possibly fall into the trap of thinking that cataloguing is an isolated process that someone else in the library team does in order to get stock ready for users. But I found that as a non-cataloger, taking part in a hands-on cataloguing project helped me to understand the kinds of decisions that are made in describing resources and to think about why they're made as well. Having the opportunity to make these decisions in practice has, I hope, helped me in my day-to-day work in helping users to get the most out of collections and develop better skills for their studies and research. So then, as a non-cataloger, I think there's also a danger that we might think about this aspect of our profession in the same way as we might think or might remember some subjects from school. I'm useless at maths, or I can't draw, or something. Oh, I can't do that. When the reality is we use some aspects of these skills all the time, and spending some time in dabbling can be a bit of a how I learned to stop worrying and love cataloguing moment. So I have to leave the webinar shortly to go back to the non-cataloguing day job and run an information literacy session. So I'm going to hand over to Simon in a moment, who's going to talk to you about the book that you're going to catalogue today. You'll have received a pack with images of the book and a template record. And if you have multiple screens, you can follow along with your template, or if you prefer, simply watch, because Amy will be sharing her screen and we'll send a completed template for you to review after the session. So as has been mentioned, Simon will be keeping an eye on the chat, so do post any questions there as well. So diolch yn fawr bawb, and I'm going to pass over to Simon.
Good afternoon. I hope you can all hear me okay. My name is, I've forgotten. No, my name's Simon French. And like Lloyd, I'm one of the subject librarians at Aberystwyth University. And too, like Lloyd, I'm both a non-cataloger and definitely a dabbler. But before becoming a librarian at Aberystwyth, I spent 25 years working in the rare book trade, where I spent many happy hours cataloguing old and rare books. And pretty much the singular aim of a rare book catalogue is to sell the books. And you'll often see, particularly in the entries, and especially in those high-end book catalogues, that much is made of the historical significance of a book and of its author, perhaps. Also, much is made of provenance marks that may be in the book, and a lot of space is often given over to describing bindings, for example. You know, is the binding on the book original? Is it particularly fancy? Fancy is very much a technical bookseller's term. I'm not going to get bogged down in jargon, but that's just one I'm going to use today. Or in the case of some of the, let's say, how shall I put this, less well cared for books, does the book still have a binding at all? And for potential purchasers looking at a rare book sale catalogue, condition is of paramount importance, and therefore significant effort on the part of the cataloguer is put into describing the physical state of the book. About 8 years ago, I started on the graduate trainee programme at Aberystwyth University, which is where I met Amy, and she very kindly took me under her wing and introduced me to the intricacies of cataloguing books in a university setting, where, unlike in the rare book trade, discoverability of the resources is the overriding aim. And with perhaps the exception of special collections cataloguing, when preparing catalogue records at the university library, sometimes less can be made of things like condition of a book or the binding of a book, unless the binding, as I said previously, is particularly fancy or is by some well-known binder. And also, and again, I'm speaking generally, the cultural significance of the book and its biographical information about the author may not necessarily be as extensively recorded in the same way that it is in a rare book sale catalogue. The key information on the records that are collected are those elements that allow for fast and accurate discoverability of the resources that the library holds. And it is those elements of the book that we're going to be looking at in this session. Now, as you're well aware, we're doing this session online, but if we'd been doing it in person, we would have brought some of our books from our collections to catalogue, and we would have handed them around and we could have all had a good look at them. But as this is an online session, we obviously couldn't do that. We were also a bit concerned, being librarians, that we were going to bump up against copyright legislation if we started providing photocopies and images from books that are still within copyright. So we've had to have a bit of a rethink on our normal setup. And Amy saved the day here with this. She's married to an artist, and he's very kindly given us permission to use his book as our cataloguing example today. And this is it. Hopefully you can see it okay. You should have extensive pictures of it in your pack, but I'm just going to show you a few things now from the book that we might want to start thinking about when we're looking at our catalogue record. And I'm sorry for the glare off for the light here. So this is the book. It's a photography book, and Lloyd mentioned earlier that he and I catalogued a photography collection, and I'm very keen myself on photography books. This one is called 90 Minutes, and it's the greatest moments from the World Cup, and it's written by Robert Davis. It also has a build-up by the very famous Italian footballer Gianluca Vialli, and along with a commentary by Richard Williams. Other information that you'll see here on the cover, right down here that I've almost got my finger over, Merrill are the publishers. Their name also appears on the spine of the book. The book is a hardcover. As you'll see, it has a dust jacket on it, if I can just quickly show you that. On the rear cover, you'll find a little bit of the publisher's blurb, and right down the bottom there is a barcode. Inside the book, and again, you should have this in your pack, you'll see that on the inside front cover, there's some more information about the book, including a little bit of biographical information. Inside, we have both a title page and a copyright page with information on where and when the book was published. There's a table of contents, in this case, described as a programme. The football theme terminology is heavy here, I think you'll see. And on the following page up is an inscription from the author. So that's the book that we're going to be looking at today. It's called 90 Minutes, The Greatest Moments from the World Cup. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat, as we've all said. If there's any questions that come up, I'll do my level best to answer them. If I can't, then we'll put them to Amy at the end, because she's the expert here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to her now to continue with the rest of the session. Thank you very much.
Right, so hopefully now what you're seeing is a slightly scary looking inside of our library management system, which is Ex Libris's Alma. I've got a monitor and I've got some stuff to cut and paste and things like that, so I apologise. I'm going to keep moving. But yes, I also apologise that I'm going to be talking for a really long time now about something that I normally do entirely by myself. So it's quite strange, and I'm going to rely on Simon to interrupt me if anything's not working or if people have really urgent questions. Yes, let's see how it goes. So this is my metadata editor screen. It's where we do the editing of records. So, and each system will look different, and within a system, different permissions will let you see different applications. So basically, I'm saying don't worry if you use your LMS and you don't see this, or if you are doing some cataloging and it doesn't look like this, it's fine. What is key is that you can see similar fields to those in the template that we sent you. So the field numbers down the left correspond to the Mark 21 fields that you everywhere that we all use. So you can find out what each means and what content is appropriate for each field by navigating that Mark 21 website that we sent you the link to. I would also say though, please ignore the warnings at the bottom of my screen. We just haven't assigned any particular significance to these locally. So I've just got used to not seeing them, and Lloyd was like, oh my God, you have 7 warnings. You might have proper meanings for yours locally, but we don't. So today, right, it's tempting to work through from the top to the bottom, but instead I'm going to start with the physical item itself, and then move out to look at the fields that describe other entities, so things like people, subjects, and so on. But to get to the oddest and least friendly part, I think, of a record out of the way, I thought we'd look at the form fields first. So we haven't included the leader, the LDR, that you can see on my screen there at the very top on your template. Nor have we included a 001 or a 005, they're sort of system generated upon save. But similarly to the leader and to the 008, which you do have, you can think of these as sort of system fields that are summarizing information. And for a long time, I'll admit, I left them well alone because I didn't really understand what they meant. And they will look different in different systems as well. But all we're going to say here about them is that if you're working on metadata in an electronic system, as opposed to a card catalogue, we're pretty lucky if you're on a card catalogue, or a template like the one that we've sent you. If you're in an electronic system, then it is really important not to ignore them and to kind of find out what they're for. But do post any questions you have about them in the chat. So the one form field we have included is the 008 field, as all MARC records need one. And it's a sort of summary of the data that appears in other parts of the record. How many of the subfields that you need to fill in, and I'm just going to open it now. So it's a form field because it's condensing all these different bits of information. So how many of those subfields that you're filling in will vary, but that depends on things like the material type and your locally set procedures. And we just try and leave a hash in the blank subfields. But it is a safe bet that we're all going to need to record a date of publication. So you'll see some options here for different types of date. The continuing resource currently published, continuing resource ceased publication, those are a couple we'd use quite regularly. Reprint, reissue date is also something we might use quite a lot. But today we are using single known probable date. So as I try and say to some concerned colleagues sometimes, I'm not absolutely sure when it was, there is room in this part of the record to be a bit flexible when we're saying it's probable. So if we had selected reprint and reissue date, for example, and this book had been republished in 2019, we'd put that as the reprint date, and then you've got a second box here where we would put the original date, which hopefully everybody knows already is on the item, and it's 2006. But we don't need that today. Just thought I'd show you what that field might be for. We're not going to be using it. So I'm just going to add 2006 here. So in place of publication, which is the next field we're going to be using, you're looking for a country or something more specific than that, depending on your local practice. In Aberystwyth, we select country or American states, if they've been published there, but also devolved UK nations. So we do put England rather than UK, and that's so that we can understand how much of our collection has been published in Wales. We then get 4 opportunities to describe the type of illustrations your item might include, and don't get too excited about that as art specialists, because they're a bit of a strange collection, and it's the same list in each of the 4 next subfields. And I wouldn't go overboard at this level. It will depend on local practice. I used to want to be very literal and record charts, for example. But if there is a chart on page 92 of a book that you're cataloguing, is that useful for us as librarians or for our users when they're searching the catalogue? If the book is jam-packed full of charts, then that might well be useful. So then we might select it then. So I'm a bit more cautious these days. What we're going to do is select illustrations as a broad overall description. We did decide when Lloyd, Simon and I talked about it that we would select portraits because there are a number of well-known people with images in this work. So we'll select that. It would be interesting, given the audience today, if other people would or already are using photographs. And I don't know enough about how this term is usually used, because it would concern me that it might also include things like biographical photographs in autobiographies, things like that. And so at this point, we're not going to use it, but it'd be interesting to know if other people do. So we're just going to select those 2 and leave the other 2 blank. At Aberystwyth, because of the context of our collections as a university library, we would only use the next potential subfield, which is target audience, this one here. So you get some options there. to talk about books that we might have that are for young people, because we do have a PGCE course and some children's literature and things like that. Otherwise, we would leave it blank. So I'll just leave that up a second there. Similarly, we use the form of item field here. We wouldn't fill it in if it's a book, if it's a standard sort of book as we've got here. But if it was an ebook, we would definitely select here online. If it was microfilm or microfiche, not that I've catalogued those for a while, but we would say this here. We'll stick with none of the following though today. You then have 4 more opportunities to select what I feel is quite a sort of, again, a quite random selection of other types of content that might be in your work. At Aberystwyth, we do make sure we use a few of these. So we would use bibliographies a lot because of the academic works that we have. And so it's a way of trying to give people a clue if it's secondary sources or primary sources. We would use comics, graphic novels, if that's what we're describing. Dictionaries, yes, definitely, and theses. So those are the top ones that we're using a lot because we catalogue our PhD theses here as well. I don't think we needed any of those today. We would also say if, so it's not a government publication, so we'll leave that. We would say if it was a conference, it would come out of a conference or some other kind of meeting or event. We would say if it was a festschrift, which it isn't, so that's just a yes or a no. We will also say if the item has an index, which we decided today we wouldn't. We did have a look at some of the, there's a summary of images at the end, but they're not really performing the function of an index in the sense that they're telling you which page to go back to find information about it. So we decided against that. If we did have bibliographies or bibliographic references and an index, we would then have a 504 field further down in the record, because that's a way of us sort of saying in a human readable way, this has bibliographical references and an index, because that's quite useful to our audience, we feel. Biographical options. So this was quite interesting in that we've been back and forth a little bit, and I think I've changed my mind again because there is some biographical information that you should see on your Flyleaf PDF. But as Simon was showing it then, and I was having a quick look at my copy here, it's on the Flyleaf only. It's not really on the item. So, you know, lots of libraries wouldn't end up keeping the Flyleaf. And then we're describing the content. So I think I'm going to say no. You could say it had contained biographical information because it does on that Flyleaf about the artist, the journalist and the footballer. But I think it's not significant enough and I can't guarantee it. So I'm going to say no. Otherwise, it could be things like biography, autobiography, collective biography, if it's a number of different artists, for example, and there was a bit of information about each artist. So that's I think that's quite a useful little field to fill in when it's relevant. Then finally, we're going to look in this form field, we're going to look at language, and that's the language of the content of the resource. So we've selected English. If there is more than one language, you can select either multiple or you can select one of those languages, and then in a 041 field lower down, you can actually put the codes for all the languages that are that appear in the resource. So it's not all or nothing at this stage, it's like a summary at the top. So we've got a lot of good information here that we know that we're going to return to and expand upon some of it in different fields. So that's our form field that we'll get out of the way now. And as you can see here, I'm not expecting you to write that into your template necessarily, but it's a sort of a quick summary. And once you do this a lot, you can you'll know if there's 2 dates that there might have been a reprint, that this is where it was published, this is what language it's in. If there's an A there, it says there's going to be some illustrations. So you just get used to kind of looking at that information very quickly. Oh, it does say reprint there. I've left the reprint in, haven't I? And we're going to skip through and just look at the last meta kind of field, the meta field, I suppose, which is the 040. And this is where we record information about ourselves as cataloguers. So each institution has a mark code, and ABBA's is, well, I'm going to paste that in. I'm not very good at talking and typing. So ABBA's is the very memorable Ulabu, which is how Simon and I remember it. And I think, if Simon, could you put in the chat, if people are interested, if you don't know what your organisational code is, there is, you can find out via the British Library on this link. So the $A, if we would create the record ourselves, will appear in that $A. And I'm using the term dollar, as everybody knows what it means. It's literally just a subdivider, and I'm guessing it's what was originally used to subdivide a field. And so in our old system Voyager, it was a single dollar. In others, it looks more like a little dagger, but it's just a way of breaking up a field into several subfields. So that $A is for the institution that's creating the field. The $B is the language that the resource was catalogued in, which can be and often is, quite different to the language of the resource itself. And there is also, we've got a link to the list of codes, language codes as well. So if you can pop that in the chat, people are interested. And it can help you to notice this when you're copy cataloguing, as different countries will have different practices and habits. So it can kind of cue you for the kind of work that you're going to need to do to the record to make it consistent with your collection. So we catalogue in English, whatever the language of the resource. And that's the case in Wales, even with the National Library of Wales, because we don't want to be maintaining separate vocabularies and practices in our catalogues. But we do often use records that have been catalogued in French, Spanish and German. And so you'll see a different code here in some of our records. The $C will often be the same as the $A as it is here, but it actually refers to the transcribing agency. So where you have like a large cooperative program generating records, say at a national library or a large consortium, but another organisation might actually be transcribing the work in hand, they would have to record a different MARC institutional code there. But we're doing all of it, so both are the same today. So when copy cataloguing, you will see sometimes, and obviously there's no, oh, I've got a D there. I just think it's a $C. There aren't any $Ds because the $D is where another cataloguer at another institution, say one of yours, has added or changed a record. So this is new, it hasn't gone out there into the world yet, but where you sometimes see, tens and maybe more of institutional codes there in $Ds. And that's where people have done something to the record and they're saying, I've done something to the record. And they might be doing something like changing it from AACR2 to RDA, or adding subject headings or more information on illustrations, for example. And so it's a way of tracking the contributors to a record. It doesn't tell you what people have done, but it's a cumulative kind of effort, so you can see who else has been working on a record. So the last subfield we'll use is the one that says that this resource was catalogued to RDA rules. So when my acquisitions colleagues are pulling in records when they're buying a book, for example, that I know I'm going to have to copy catalogue, I do ask them to look out for ones that have this $E RDA, because that'll save me some work later down the line. So we haven't even really looked at the book, but we've done a lot of work. So I just wanted to see if there are any questions yet, Simon.
Currently, it's all quiet in the chat. I don't know what we need to draw from that.
Yeah.
It may be broken. I'm not an expert on technology, but yeah, hopefully you've got the organisational codes and the language codes links come through now. So those are in the chat, as Amy said, should you wish to look at them. But yeah, fire away with any questions if you have any.
Thank you. So we're going to get back to the item, and it is surprising how people new to cataloguing get quite sucked into the screen and the system and forget to look at the item closely. And I did the same today. I just remembered, like, well, I could actually go and get the book again, which is always nice. But there is so much available on the book, and it's important to actually look at that probably before you go searching online, which is what we're all tempted to do. So we're going to start with the 020, which is the ISBN field. It would be a 022 if it was a journal or a periodical, and that would be for its ISSN. But for the ISBN, ideally you want both the 10-digit and the 13-digit, but in practice at Aberystwyth we generally just go with what's on the item, which I think in this case is a 10-digit one. So the $A tells you that this is the ISBN, the resource that you have. And then you might have something like a subfield Q, and that gives you further information. So we've got hardback here, it might be paperback, or it might be a set. You could, a $Z, however, would tell you, so if that was before a number, that would tell you that what follows it is not the ISBN. And you might be thinking, well, why are you putting that in there then? But the $Z was originally and still used to identify mistakes. So some items do have the wrong number printed on the item, for example. But today it's also used to say that there is a relevant resource with this ISBN, but it isn't the one that is being described in this record. And so that's when you have things like an ebook version. And today you'll find perhaps for a print resource, you might have lots of $Zs that say ebook, Mobi book, PDF book, and they'll all have a $Z, and vice versa. So if you're describing the E1, the paperback, hardback editions might have a $Z. So it's a way of forcing the issue of trying to join relevant items together so that people know that they have a version of it in their catalogue. I'm not sure it's the ideal way, and there are other fields to do it better. But today we've got a 10-digit one, and I did actually have a go at using an online converter to a 13-digit. I tried several because I don't trust them particularly, but they did all come out with this ISBN. So I'm going to add that one as well. So I have pasted in our 050 Library of Congress class mark and a Dewey class mark. I think there's a Dewey class mark on this item. We use Library of Congress at Aberystwyth. And although we're not going to talk about classification today, because one, it would lead down months of discussion in and of itself, but also because everybody's using something slightly different. But it is useful if you find them in a record. We always keep them, even the Dewey number, because if you've got one of those, it can help you find other information if you need it, things like subject headings. And if you have a Dewey, it can help you find a Library of Congress number and vice versa. So if you have any questions about those, then feel free to ask about them later. So if we keep moving through, we're going to come back to the all-important 100 field and go straight to the 245. So this is the title and statement of responsibility field, which is the one place that is almost entirely transcribed from the item itself, traditionally the title page. I say almost though, because, and again, there is some catalogue of judgment here, if it was all in capitals, unless that was a really important kind of statement about the work, then I wouldn't reproduce them, because otherwise it doesn't look very nice. It's not very accessible for the reader in the catalogue. But we would obviously if it was acronyms and things like that. So let's have a look. You'll notice some numbers in these little boxes between the field number and the content itself. Now, these are called the first and second indicators. And for some fields, they aren't used at all. You'll see lots where no numbers are appearing. And for many, they are only used if you need to distinguish the coming information in some way. So you're using them sometimes and not others. But the 245 is a good example of where they are quite important. So the first indicator here, where we've got a 1, is telling our system and discovery layer that we want the title to be an added entry. So if you imagine a card catalogue, you might have a card for this book with the artist's name on the top as the heading, and another one with the title. But if the title was the same as the artist's name, and I think that happens quite a lot in art and in literature, for example, then you wouldn't bother. And yeah, but we are going to, because the title and the author's name are very different, so we want to have both as added entries. The second indicator does something entirely different, and this is telling your discovery layer how many digits to skip when alphabetizing the results of a search for users. So if our title began with the, for example, we don't want it to appear in the search results with everything else in the catalogue that starts with a the that's come up in those results. So we're telling the system to skip over to the first significant word. So we'd have a 4, and that's because Mark will recognise that first gap, so it assumes there'll be 1 space, and then you're adding up the letters and that second space between the the first significant word. So if it was of or an, we'd have a 3 there, for example. But we don't have this nice and straightforward so $A here is for the title, and sometimes that's all you have in that section. But we're going to use a subfield B as well, and it's preceding colon. So that's telling our discovery layer that this is a subtitle. You may often see in transcribe fields like the 245, these square brackets that you can see that say photographs by. And this means where you see square brackets there, it means that it doesn't appear on the title page or possibly anywhere on the resource at all, but that the cataloguer has deemed it important to add. So here in the $C and its preceding / it indicates, and that indicates the statement of responsibility. We've added square brackets photographs by to help our users. So cataloguer judgment decides how much detail to record in this section. So, and again, it's important to have reasons for why you might record more across the organisation. So for consistency in the catalogue, you don't want to have some things that have tons of data and others that don't for no particular reason, because it's telling people something. We think it's useful to record more detail, for example, for our rare books. So we might use people, all the things that come after people's names, for example, because users are then going to be coming from a long way to come and see them. So they might need as much information as possible. And also works that involve quite different contributors. It can be quite important to identify them as they appear. So in films or works about art, for example. So in this case, it tells you a number of things about the resource that a well-known footballer and a well-known sports journalist have been involved in putting this resource together. So while you don't have to add all contributors, and sometimes it's not helpful, it is important to consider artists, curators, introductions, forwards, illustrators, compilers, and so on, and have a think about how significant that's going to be and how it might be helping your users. I'm sure many of you work with resources that like to buck the book trend, and I used to work in performance arts library, and quite often there isn't a title page at all, and even some quite straightforward texts have different sorts of titles. So luckily we have another field, this 246, and where I've got a 3 in that first indicator, it means an other title. And this allows for index searching, whether a user is searching, in this case, numbers or letters for 90. So I'm going to add in our other title. But there are a number of different, there's up to 8, I think, different types of titles. So you get a different number for each of them in that indicator. So if you had a 4 there, it would mean a cover title. because sometimes that's different to what's in the on the title page. Or if there was an 8, it would mean the spine title. So you can be making sure that you're covering all of the options. So the 264 is for publication information. Now this resource is a fairly straightforward production, so recording where and who published it and when isn't too hard. You can often find this information on the page opposite the title page, but with catalogues and other art books, you may find that the information at the back, or you may find the information at the back and that it's difficult to untangle from exhibition production information. And sometimes it isn't too clear what we're describing. So RDA does give you rules that allow you some options. So by picking different indicators, where we've got that one, which just says it's publication information, you can say, and you can find these in Mark 21, it will tell you, you can say things about printing and distribution, manufacturer and copyright instead. And actually you can repeat the 264 field to kind of cobble together as much information as possible without trying to force it all into the same field. But in our case, this is nice and straightforward. So the 300 field is for physical description, and the basics might include preface, page numbering, illustration information, and book height. And the latter for us, for example, it tells us what kind of shelf, size of shelf a book can go on. So it might also be width, obviously, in especially I think in art collections. But the depth of detail is institution specific. It's good to be guided by your users' needs and the idea of what future the item might have in your collection. Is it likely to be replaced? Is it going to be perhaps not needed when a course is finished? Or is this a key resource that lots of different types of users are going to keep coming to see over the years? Just going to have to move you over there. So this is what we've gone with. Kind of gives you a sense of the scale of the item. So if you're a long way away, or you were checking if this was the book you were thinking about, the predominant content and some size for the shelving. So moving on to what we call the 3XX field. So in this case, it's the 336 to the 338. Now these aren't playing a huge role yet in our library catalogues as our users will see them, but they are a key feature of RDA, and it aims to describe a resource's content separately from its media, separately from the media required to access it and the carrier that it comes in, so that the diverse range of our collections and the diversity of ways and tools needed to access them can be made clear in a consistent way across the world. So a film, for example, might have the content, the 336 there, as a 2-dimensional moving image, but it may be accessible online via streaming or via a DVD. So you'd want to be able to record which one it was. Language materials such as a book like this one might be unmediated and carried in a volume like this one, or you might need a computer to access it because it's an ebook. And I realise I need to fill that one in. So those are our 3XX fields there. And the 500 fields offer us a phenomenal number of notes fields, and that's where I would have a look if you're ever looking at Mark 21, is just see the range of 500 note fields are amazing. And where information is assigned a specific 500 field note, then it is a great idea to use them when you think it's going to be useful to your users. In the past, we've certainly been guilty of chucking any old free text in a literal 500 field rather than finding the specific one, because the specific field can then format that information properly for the catalogue interface. So that's why it works better. So a 505 is a good example. Some subjects don't lend themselves to great subject headings because they're a bit blunt, but chapter headings can then tell a user a lot of useful information. Sometimes you do see huge long lists of contents because a publisher has put them in, and it's up to us whether we keep them or not. But they sometimes don't contribute any important terms, names, or concepts. So don't assume that more is better. But we felt that the frame of this work as a match, as a football match, meant that recording the contents, as in the program image that you've been sent, would be an important contribution to the data describing it. So I'm going to add that content there. And it's a useful field as well if it's a collected work. Oh gosh, I'm not thinking straight, but if it's lots of chapters by different people, you can then assign this coding to say who's responsible for each of those chapters. So again, they might not appear in your 245, but if they're here in the 505 and somebody's searching for someone, they may have contributed a really important chapter to a book, and this helps the user then find it. And similarly, a summary note, especially if it's as it's written on the item, I think can really help a user. We find that collections of poetry and literature, for example, can really benefit from a summary description. There are indicators that allow you to say it's a review, but we don't feel our users are really looking for assessments of the content out there. So we're just including summary information. And I'd sort of remove any OTT publisher declarations about how brilliant it is. So I'm going to add the summary there, as it is on the flyleaf. And if you're lucky, you'll find this online, either on the publisher's pages or on reputable or disreputable booksellers' sites and things like that. But I can say it's on the flyleaf because that's where it's appearing on this book as well. So now we've got a really good physical description of this book. But if we are describing, as opposed to my copy here, if we were going to describe Simon's copy, we might feel we should describe item level information too, because it's got something that my copy doesn't have. So can you read that out for us, Simon?
So yeah, so there's an inscription from the author, and it says, quote, "Simon, thanks for sticking up for me. Best, Robert Davies."
So we would firstly want to say, I don't seem to have saved it, so I'm typing it out. Apologies for listening to me type. We'd want to say what copy number it was. So say we've got 4 copies. We want to make sure that we're telling people that it's a specific copy and that they can find that specific copy that has this fantastic inscription in it. So other things we might include here would be, so sorry, I can't talk and type. Inscribed book plates, I think what else, things like no, binding goes in the 563, but if there are former owners, information that is specific to this item and it's about its provenance, because this is a custodial history field. So we have to say which copy it was, but also because we export our records to aggregated services like WorldCat and JISC Library Hub, because it's great to be able to share your stuff, so we're not all reinventing the wheel all of the time, is you then put your institutional code in again. So if somebody picks up this record because they're trying to catalogue this book, they'll know that this 561 is not about their copy of it. They can delete that field. This point, I think we've done a pretty good job at working with what we've got in front of us according to standards and guidelines that we can access. But what we're not yet doing is tapping into the wealth of work out there and linking to other pots of metadata that can help bring our resources into touch with others by the same author or illustrator or former owner, or about the same subject. that's when, oh, sorry, I knew there was something I was going to miss there. Inscribed, I might say inscribed on title page. Before we move into this sort of controlled vocabularies, old school linked data. So at Aberystwyth, we're a generalist collection. We don't use specialist controlled vocabularies. And in the UK, we don't commit to keeping our own national controlled vocabulary, but we do get to use the Library of Congress's, which is free and maintained by them. Now, the issues with Library of Congress subject and name headings are well documented, and have a look at the great documentary about the term illegal aliens for more information on that. But it's important to remember that it is a Library of Congress library. So it's not trying to describe a national library, because it's not a national library. And it's certainly not an international one. It's only describing its content. And without it, our users would have an even harder time collating useful results that bring together like with like, and accurately finding resources by a specific person with the same name as someone else. So if you're interested in finding out more about how to actively improve the equalities, diversity and inclusion aspects though of your headings, I thoroughly recommend a session that I went to a couple of weeks ago, because you see lots of things where they say, oh, you know, decolonize your catalogue, and it's quite a difficult thing to pin down what people mean by that. But this session was great. It was metadata through a DEI lens, and I think Simon's going to post the link in case people are interested. Creating more inclusive cataloguing in the MARC environment, because it gave you some really practical ideas. So that was I wanted to be able to share that. So that's all some background that should illustrate how important international discussions about headings, or sometimes they're called authorities, are in the cataloguing world. But let's have a look at what we're talking about. So where we transcribe the statement of responsibility for a resource in the 245C, we use the 100 field to link out to the standardized form of a creator's name. And hopefully we get to use the version of a name as recorded in a name authority file. So we're using the Library of Congress name headings, but there are others, and there are attempts to map them all to each other and kind of come up with a super controlled vocabulary that means that, you know, that really empowers our users' searches. But to show that we are using the Library of Congress, we put a 0 in that second indicator there. So I would look out for records when we're doing copy cataloguing that do something similar. Where are we now? And then the first indicator has a 1 in it. So this is telling us that we're going to be writing the family name, then first name order. For names like Madonna, or for a name written first name first, as in the Welsh patronymic form like Ivor ap Glyn, then you'd put a 0 there, for example. But we've got the 1. And in systems like Alma, you can search within Alma to do a basic search of headings. But when you have a name that is going to have a lot of hits, it can be better to go straight to Library of Congress subject headings and search in the name file there instead. So I was going to do this. And Simon, I'm hoping you'll tell me if it's not following. Well, actually, that's going to need to do it again, isn't it? So I'm going to have a look for what these. And as you can imagine, there's quite a few of them. And I can just scroll down a little bit there. I think it goes as far as somebody called Roberta. But there's a lot, and you don't have time to be looking through all of these. But first of all, there's some, you can ignore some based on common sense and known information. So we know this was published in 2006. So some of these early ones are probably not going to be helpful. I happen to know that he's not dead, so we can skip some others. And then you might have, this is where you start to sort of triangulate bits of information, and you're a bit like a detective from outside sources. And it's not that you're going away and thinking, okay, everything on Wikipedia is true, but if you are able to look at something, given the knowledge that you have from the item that you have, you might the information that you're going to find on Library of Congress, but Wikipedia, authors' websites, biographical information about them on the resource, sometimes in biographical databases online. You can start to sort of build a picture of where the likely information is going to be found and what you can trust and use to corroborate something. Things like middle names, for example. And so I happen to know that he was born in 1964. So we can scroll down here and we can see that we've got 3 that have something along here in 1964. So it's not too bad. We can do some searches here. Now there's 1 with references and 2 with authorized headings. If you only found something with references, then it's well worth clicking that and following through, because it will take you to perhaps differently structured names for that person if there is an authorized heading. So that's why looking in here I find really better than doing it within Alma. But we've got a couple of authorized headings, so we'll have a look here. So you just keep clicking. And this is the authority record. This is the form of the name that you'd use if this is the Robert Davis that you're after. And here's some information about how that record has been put together. So there's something called VW Beetle, the complete story, published in 1996. So this doesn't rule out this person as being our artist one way or another, really. So I go back and we'll try this one, 1964 August, and select this one. Here's your heading. There's some more information here. So if you've had a chance to look at the artist's website, you might have seen that he had a Material Light exhibition that resulted in the publication of a catalogue. So we now know that this is going to be our Robert Davis. So that's very useful. You might have found that, you know, he's from Birmingham. So there's ways that you can start to work out if you're on the right track. So I can copy him in, which I will do now. But before I go, actually, we can see here, if you look further down in these 670s at the bottom, you can see that when this record was created, so it was in 2003 and it was based on an email from the author. So they probably somebody's had the book to catalogue and they'll have contacted, he doesn't remember this, but maybe an agent or he has sent something and he's forgotten. But then underneath there's another one here, and this was triggered by this session because I was showing my husband, because I do this all the time, a record of this book, and as well as sort of just thinking, oh my God, look at all that data, what on earth is it that you spend all your time doing? He did also notice that there was a lot of information in his name heading that he wasn't happy with. So I encouraged him to try out the contact form that there is on the Library of Congress webpage, thinking I have no idea how long it's going to take them or, you know, what happens. But they actually got back to him within a week and changed the authority heading that then within a couple of weeks had filtered out to all of our systems. And so it has been changed. So they've removed the date and just left in the month so that it distinguishes him from the other 1964 Robert Davis. And so they record that, they record the changes. So I was quite impressed with how quickly they responded. And although the information it's sort of lingering there, as you may have seen, and he did see when I then showed him, here, there's no information by it here. And so eventually that will fall off the system because it's not being recognised in anybody's systems. So let's put him in the record, go back to here. And we are using the relationship designator there. Quite often this field, it's for the main creator of a record, so it will say author, or in this case artist. If it's a collaborative work, then everybody goes in a 700 instead, or if you do have lots of equal authors, you pick the first one and then put the others in the 700s. But if it's an edited work, they would all go in the 700s. And these $Es, the relationship designators, let us then describe what somebody's relationship is to a work. So if you came across this, you'd know that he was the creator of the work, not somebody who just contributed, say, some illustrations to something. It's a way of distinguishing somebody's relationship with a work. So we did the same searching for the journalist Richard Williams and the footballer Vialli. And luckily they both also have name headings. And we've written something that tries to describe their connection to the item as well. Now, there was one other person that we would want to describe, especially if he's donated his collection of photography books to us. And so you might have to write this on your template if you are doing that. And that's Simon French, because we do mention him here. And it's important. I mean, you wouldn't have to necessarily, because you wouldn't know from that. But if you'd left a book plate perhaps in the item, we definitely want to be mentioning him there. And then we put our institutional code in to say that this was just our copy that has anything to do with this individual. So that's if somebody's inscribed your copy or has some kind of connection to the item itself. All right, so with names, we know we are looking for specific individuals and seeking to differentiate them from each other where we can. With subject headings, though, we're looking to bring like with like. So we have more choices, which is helpful, but it's also more work. So in reality, though, when copy cataloguing or working on a fairly well-established topic, we would definitely say don't reinvent the wheel. And so if you're interested in learning how to build subject headings, because it's a bit convoluted, then I'd read Van der Broughton's very readable Essential Library of Congress Subject Headings. So I think Simon might put that in the chat, the title there. But a number of places you can go when you're not sure how to do this, and we do this a lot, is the item itself. So sometimes this will have a class mark on it and a Library of Congress subject heading, and there is one on here, I think, and the jury number. You could also go to look for other records for the same item. So you could go to WorldCat, or, and in this case, JISC Library Hub included the one that's on the item and another one. You could go to earlier records for earlier versions of a work. So if something's been reprinted, the older records might be richer because other cataloguers have added to them, and the content itself won't have changed if it's just been reprinted. So you can certainly use that information. You could also correlate it against some information you have, as I was saying before. If you've got a class mark and you subscribe to something like ClassWeb, you can search for class marks in a particular, subject headings in a particular class mark range, and that gives you something to start with. Or you can look at your own catalogue and have a look at similar topics and see how your other items have been described. So there's lots of kind of cheats to get you going. I think the key is though its precision is more important than quantity. So we do have some records come through from publishers that might say something like history or politics, and that's not helpful to anyone. It doesn't help a user at a university, certainly, come up with items that are going to be useful for them. But if you are doing a pick and mix borrowing like this, which we do all the time, then just check your headings either in ClassWeb if you subscribe to it, or in this Library of Congress subject headings that we were just looking at. So the heading on the item itself is actually a 611 field. So I'm going to paste that in now, and then I realise I'm rushing a little bit now because I realise we don't have much time for questions. So this is subject added entry in which the entry element is a meeting or conference name. So basically that's a regular event, which is why the World Cup gets its own heading. And then you can have the subfield codes added on. So there's a general $X is a general subdivision. History, that'll appear on lots of things that you might have. And $V is a form subdivision. So pictorial works is a way of us linking up the content that the artist is looking at with the fact that he's an artist. If I had more time, I would have a look in Library of Congress subject headings again to look at the soccer history one. But again, it's using subdivisions to kind of build up a search, and underneath those will be all sorts of other things that people might be searching for. So it helps it bring together an awful lot more than in those specific words there. And you could see that if you were looking in Library of Congress subject headings, all the terms that come underneath, and they're all brought together with this work if you were looking in our catalogue. And there we have it, a pretty full operational bibliographic record. So in summary, we could have just imported somebody else's record for this book and then tweaked it a little bit to meet our institutional standards. And where that's possible, that's exactly what we would do. Or we could have created a much more basic record from scratch without any references to standards or controlled vocabularies, say via an Excel spreadsheet with just a title, author, and publication date. Or we could spend much longer delving into more details than a specialist library would need. And bibliographic cataloguing is like a piece of string in that sense. But we do have our local guidance, what we need our researchers to find. And given that we can share our records now and data across the professional world, our records, as I said, go to WorldCat and GIST Library Hub, we agreed to try to meet some shared goals so that our records are as ethical as they can be, as accountable as they can be, and as useful to us, a wider audience as they can be. Audiences across time. What will a user of this data in 30 years or 100 years want to know? They might be as interested in the entities we describe, the World Cup or Richard Williams, as the book, for example, and audiences across space. So if I did import a record for this book, I would leave in headings for other controlled vocabularies that we don't use, like the German National Vocabulary or MESH medical headings. We also use agreed codes to describe things like language and country of publication, and machine readable code as well as human readable text, so it can be used anywhere in the world, like the 3XX fields. So I'd argue that organising the products of human imagination takes as much imagination as creating them, although don't tell my husband that, obviously. And it takes a lot of cooperation. And while we are all under pressure to be efficient and predictable, line managers need to know how long a shelf of books is going to take to catalogue. What's great about cataloguing is precisely those philosophical moments where you have to choose a pragmatic course of action. It's sort of scary and responsible, but you're never alone. Even if the next person to pick up and borrow or enhance your data is in 50 or 100 years' time, you are sharing and talking to each other all the time. Thank you. So I'm going to stop screen sharing, but I can come back if people want.